He was never supposed to remember that spring break like this, but some memories don't fade, no matter how much time passes. What started as a simple, quiet getaway turned into something far darker, something that would stay with him long after they left those woods behind. It had all begun with Anna's idea. She wanted something low-key, something peaceful. A cabin deep in the woods where the world couldn't reach them. No noise, no stress, no responsibilities. Just a few days to disappear. Her brother Hunter was already staying with them at the time, so he joined the trip without much thought. When he found the cabin online, it seemed perfect. Isolated, quiet, and strangely cheap. For a brief second, that price didn't sit right with him, but like most things that later matter, he ignored it. They arrived Friday evening just as the light was fading. The drive itself had already felt strange. The deeper they went, the less connected everything seemed. By the time they reached the cabin, it felt completely cut off from the world. Standing on the porch, you couldn't even see the road they had driven in on. At the time, that isolation felt peaceful. Later, it would feel like a trap. Off to the side of the property stood a separate structure, a large shed with a heavy padlock on the door. Hunter walked over and examined it for a moment, casually mentioning that the lock looked new, like it had been replaced recently. The comment lingered just long enough to register before being dismissed. It was easy to explain away. Probably just storage. Nothing important. As night settled in, they went inside, made dinner, had a few drinks, and tried to relax. The woods, however, were anything but silent. A constant chorus of insects, frogs, and distant movement filled the air. It was loud, but in a strange way, calming. Like the forest was alive and breathing around them. Sometime before falling asleep, he heard something heavier moving out there. Something bigger than the small creatures making all that noise. It wasn't loud, just enough to stand out. He told himself it was a deer. That explanation was easy, comfortable, and he accepted it without question. But the night didn't stay quiet for long. He woke up suddenly to a sharp thump against the side of the cabin. At first, he didn't move. His mind tried to convince him it was part of a dream. Maybe the house settling, maybe something random. He stayed still, listening. Then it came again. The same exact sound. Something hitting the cabin. He turned to check Anna, but she was still asleep, completely unaware. That meant it was up to him to figure it out. The idea of going outside crossed his mind, but it felt wrong immediately. Instead, he grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the window. The darkness outside was thick, almost unnatural. The beam of light barely cut through it, but it was enough. Enough to see what shouldn't have been there. Footprints. Fresh footprints pressed into the wet ground near the outbuilding. The rain had started earlier that night, which meant those prints were recent. Very recent. They didn't belong to any of them. For a moment, he tried to rationalize it. Maybe Hunter had gone outside. Maybe there was some simple explanation. But deep down, he already knew. Those prints weren't theirs, and whatever made them was still out there. He didn't go outside after that. Instead, he checked every lock, made sure the doors were secure, and went back to bed. But sleep didn't come easily anymore. A few hours later, something else broke the silence. Knocking. Loud, deliberate knocking on the front door. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong in the middle of nowhere, especially not at 4 a.m. It wasn't random. It wasn't the wind. Someone was standing outside that door. Anna woke up instantly, fear already in her eyes. He could feel his own heart racing, but there was no avoiding it. Someone was out there, and they weren't leaving. He walked slowly to the door. Before he could even say anything, a voice came from the other side. A man's voice. Calm, controlled. He claimed to be a forest ranger and said there had been some kind of incident nearby. He needed to do a welfare check. For a moment, it almost sounded believable. Almost. But something felt off. The timing. The tone. The fact that they were so far out that no one should even know they were there. He responded carefully, keeping the door shut. Told the man they were fine and didn't need anything. There was a pause, then the man spoke again, more insistent this time. Asking questions. Pushing. That was when the fear truly set in. Behind him, Hunter had woken up and quietly stepped closer. He whispered for him to call the police. No hesitation. Just do it. While Hunter made the call, he stayed at the door, stalling, trying to keep the situation from escalating. When Hunter returned, his voice was barely a whisper. There were no rangers in the area. The man outside wasn't who he claimed to be. And somehow, it felt like the person on the other side of the door knew that they knew. The knocking turned into banging. Loud, aggressive, violent. The man's voice changed completely. He started shouting, making threats, demanding that the door be opened. Anna screamed at him to go away, but that only made things worse. The sounds moved around the cabin. Heavy footsteps circling the walls, searching for another way in. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen. Hunter did the same. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both understood what was happening. Then suddenly, glass shattered. One of the windows exploded inward as something heavy was thrown through it. For a moment, everything froze. They expected him to come through next. Expected the nightmare to step inside. But he didn't. There was only silence. A long, suffocating silence. Then, in the distance, the sound of sirens. The man disappeared. Just like that. Gone into the woods as if he had never been there at all. When the police arrived, it was already over. They searched the area, the property, the woods. Nothing. No sign of him. It was like he had vanished into the darkness. Hunter argued, furious that someone could disappear so quickly, but there was nothing the officers could do. They advised them to leave immediately. Said it wasn't safe to stay there. So they packed their things and left before sunrise. It wasn't until they were far away from that cabin, back on a normal road, that everything started to sink in. That place had been too isolated. Too hidden. For someone to find them out there, to show up in the middle of the night pretending to be authority, it didn't feel random. It felt planned. And the most terrifying part wasn't what happened that night. It was what could have happened if the police hadn't arrived when they did. He would later realize that spring break in 2016 was the moment everything stopped feeling invincible. At the time, he was a senior in college, living the kind of life that felt untouchable. Parties, friends, and the chaos that came with being part of a fraternity. That year, like many before it, the plan was simple. A massive group trip for spring break. This time, the destination was Acapulco. Within weeks, the group had grown to nearly 40 people. Everyone packed into the same resort, ready for a week of non-stop partying. It wasn't exactly the most responsible environment, but no one cared. That was the point. Days blended into nights, and nothing felt real outside of the moment. But the story wasn't really about him. It was about Sahil. Sahil was the kind of person who made everything louder, bigger, and more chaotic. He was fun, unpredictable, and completely fearless in a way that often ignored consequences. People loved him for it, but it also meant he didn't always know when to stop. A few days into the trip, a group of them decided to go out to the local clubs. The night started like any other. Loud music, crowded floors, drinks in hand, and that feeling that nothing could go wrong. Then Sahil started looking for something more. It wasn't obvious at first, but anyone who knew him could tell. He wasn't satisfied. He wanted something stronger than what he was drinking. They told him to drop it. More than once. He said he would, but no one really believed him. For a while, they kept an eye on him. But the club was huge, and people disappeared into the crowd easily. Eventually, Sahil did too. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal. He had wandered off before. He always came back. But this time, he didn't. The night went on, but something started to feel off. One minute they were partying, the next they were checking their phones, trying to reach him. Calls went straight to voicemail. His phone was dead. That didn't make sense. Sahil wasn't careless like that. After a while, they decided to head back, assuming he had already returned to the resort. Outside, the streets were packed with people trying to find rides. It was chaotic and loud. A few of them walked down the street to get away from the crowd and waited there. It was around 1 in the morning. Then they saw him. Sahil stumbled out of the darkness toward them. At first, it didn't register. Then it hit all at once. Something was very wrong. His shirt was torn, barely hanging on. His face was swollen and bruised. He was limping, struggling just to walk. They rushed him into the car without asking questions and got him back to the resort. Once they were inside, the questions finally came. At first, Sahil didn't want to talk. He kept saying he would explain later. But eventually, he did. He told them he had found a man near the bar. A short guy who didn't speak much English. There was another man with him acting as a translator. Something about the translator felt off right away, but Sahil couldn't explain why. It was just a feeling. Still, he ignored it. The man showed him a small sample of what he was offering. Sahil tried it, and after that, his judgment disappeared. The man told him they couldn't do business inside and asked him to come outside. Sahil knew it was a bad idea, but he went anyway. Outside, a car was already waiting. Before he could react, they forced him into the back seat and drove off. As soon as the car started moving, they went through his pockets, taking everything. When he resisted, they beat him. They smashed his phone and took anything of value. Then something unexpected happened. One of the men asked him why there were so many Americans in the city. Without thinking, Sahil told them about spring break. About the large group staying at the same resort. The men started talking to each other in Spanish. Something changed. A few minutes later, the car stopped. They dragged him out and threw him onto a random road in the middle of nowhere. Alone, injured, and disoriented, Sahil had no idea where he was. He started walking, guessing a direction and hoping it would lead somewhere familiar. By pure luck, it did. He eventually found his way back toward the area where they were, and that's when they saw him stumbling out of the dark. Back in the room, as he finished telling the story, the reality sank in. This wasn't just a bad night. It was something much worse. They thought about calling the police, but the idea didn't last long. Too many unknowns, too many risks in a place that wasn't theirs. So they stayed quiet. No one else at the resort ever found out what happened. On the surface, the trip continued like nothing had changed. But for those who knew, everything was different. Because that night proved something none of them had really believed before. Sometimes, one bad decision doesn't just ruin a night. Sometimes, it almost costs you your life. He had kept the story buried for years, the kind of memory that never really leaves, no matter how much time passes. It happened during spring break in his junior year, a time that was supposed to be carefree and unforgettable in a good way. Instead, it turned into something far darker. He had always been the observant type, someone who noticed small details others ignored, and although people often called him paranoid, that instinct may have been the only reason he made it out safely. The trip began when his girlfriend Anna was invited by her friend Lena, a girl who always seemed to know where the best parties were. This time, Lena had something bigger than usual, a lake house deep in the Ozarks where a mix of college students would be staying for the week. It sounded normal enough, the kind of trip people take all the time. So the four of them, him, Anna, Lena, and Lena's boyfriend Colby, packed up and drove out together. The drive was long but pleasant, until the final stretch where the road became narrow, winding, and strangely empty. When they arrived, the house immediately felt off. It was far bigger than expected, sitting right on the lake with a massive deck and far more cars parked outside than Lena had mentioned. Instead of 15 or 20 people, it looked like dozens had already arrived. At the door stood the host, a man around their age who greeted them with a rehearsed smile and a speech that felt practiced. He explained the rules of the house and then casually asked everyone to hand over their car keys, claiming it was for safety due to the dangerous roads at night. It sounded reasonable, and with a shrug, Colby handed over the keys, which were dropped into a bowl already filled with dozens of others. Inside, the party was already alive. Music filled the air, people laughed, drinks flowed, and at first, everything felt normal. But slowly, something strange began to surface. Nobody seemed to truly know each other. Groups stayed isolated, conversations felt surface level, and despite Lena insisting her friend would be there, that friend never showed up. Still, the first night passed with drinks, games, and distractions, even though one detail kept bothering him, the host. The man wasn't partying like everyone else. He moved through the house constantly, watching, occasionally writing things down on a clipboard, like he was keeping track of something. The next morning, things became stranger. The bowl of car keys was gone without explanation. While sitting outside with a coffee, trying to clear his head, he noticed a couple from the night before packing their things and leaving. He watched them drive away, disappearing down the long road. But later that night, during a bonfire by the lake, he saw them again. The same couple, sitting quietly at the edge of the group as if they had never left. Confused, he checked the driveway, their car was gone. When he returned to the fire, they were gone again too. That moment stuck with him, and the unease grew stronger. The next morning, needing distance, he went for a walk down the road. About a quarter mile away, hidden near a bend, he found something that made his stomach drop. The same car. Parked near a small equipment shed. They had never left at all. When he confronted the couple later, they denied everything, but their reaction felt off. More unsettling was the way the atmosphere around them changed. Conversations grew quieter, people seemed to watch him more closely, and a strange tension filled the air. Anna admitted she felt it too, something wasn't right about the place or the people. They decided they should leave the next day. But leaving wasn't simple. When he asked the host for the keys, the room seemed to fall silent. Conversation stopped, and nearly everyone turned to look at him. The host smiled at first, but the expression slowly faded into something cold and unreadable. He tried to convince them to stay, offering excuses and distractions. Then a girl nearby suddenly spoke, her tone sharp and unsettling, telling him it was a bad idea to leave. The tension in the room became overwhelming, but eventually, the host agreed, though he insisted only he would follow him to retrieve the keys. He led him through a confusing series of hallways until they reached a room where all the keys were neatly hung on hooks. Without asking, the host picked out the exact set that belonged to him. As he handed them over, he quietly said, "You're making a mistake." There was something in his voice that didn't feel like a warning, but a threat. They packed quickly and left within minutes. As they drove away, he couldn't help but look back at the house one last time. Standing on the deck were a dozen people, lined up silently, watching them leave. No one waved, no one spoke, they just stood there, staring. Later, they discovered something even more disturbing. Lena eventually managed to contact her friend, the one who was supposedly connected to the trip. It turned out her phone had been stolen weeks earlier, and she had never sent any of the messages about the lake house. Every detail that led them there had come from someone else, someone they never identified. No crime was ever reported. Nothing physically happened to them. But that didn't make the experience any less terrifying. Because sometimes, the scariest thing isn't what happens to you, it's realizing how close you came to something you may never fully understand.